of the things that is specified about articulating principles is that it's helpful to articulate the opposite of a principle, to be clear about what you're going. So, for example, if the principle is to focus on assets, the opposite of that is to focus on deficits, and focusing on articulating the opposite often helps clarify the principle. Well, we are working on a new edition of developmental evaluation that is expanding the principles around that. And in looking at how to think about dynamic evaluation designs, the messiness of doing developmental evaluation from a principles focused perspective, we've gone back and playing around with, instead of treating principles as opposites, is going back to the blue marble yin-yang principle and looking at expressing it that way. So I'm going to show you, this is real-time recent stuff to get your reactions to it. I'll take about 10 minutes to go through it. That will give us about 15 minutes for you to have some discussions and breakouts, and then we'll get back together and see where we are. We like to give people a chance to meet each other in small groups and communicate. So I'm going to share my screen. So the focus here is on the dynamic design operating principles, the ways in which we work with in developmental evaluation in a very flexible, dynamic way. And so the context, as I said, is looking at the yin-yang principle out of the Blue Marble book. The yin-yang principle opens with the yin-yang of life. At birth, a person is flexible and flowing. At death, a person becomes rigid and blocked. Whatever is flexible and flowing will tend to grow. Whatever is rigid and blocked will atrophy and die, from Lao Tzu. And so in the Blue Marble evaluation principles, one of the operating principles is the yin-yang principle, to harmonize conceptual opposites. The Blue Marble image of wholeness embraces that whole by recognizing and harmonizing opposites. For example, life is given meaning by death and vice versa. Up cannot exist unless there's a correspondingly opposite down. Though they are opposites, they define each other. Indeed, they give meaning each to the other. They are interconnected. The yin-yang philosophy emerged from ancient Chinese philosophy, and the image of the yin-yang captures how seemingly opposite or contrary forces may actually be complementary, interconnected, and interdependent. They illuminate each other in relationship together. Yin-yang thought emerged in the 3rd century before the modern era from contemplating nature. The moon was associated with yin and the sun associated with yang. The Taijitu symbol above comprises 2 large teardrop shapes, with the black representing yin and the white representing yang. Within the white yang is a small black circle, and within the black yin is a small white circle, symbolizing that within yin there is yang, and within yang there is yin. And so Chris Lisi did a cartoon design that's in the book about the relationship between evaluation and design, which are often treated as opposites, not necessarily, but more treated as separate and sequential. Integrating design and evaluation has been a theme throughout the Blue Marble work and developmental evaluation. And so looking at dynamic design systems, what emerges around that is a constellation of yin-yang complementary guidance and insights, sort of dialectical thinking and engagement process in which the inquirer pursues parallel trajectories that intersect like a DNA double helix molecule. And so an example of this would be in our evaluation, we have to be purpose-driven. Everything we do flows from purpose, intended use, why we're doing the evaluation, questions derive from purpose, methods serve purpose, qualitative sampling is purposeful, data gathering analysis flow from purpose, findings fulfill purpose. Research and evaluation can serve a variety of purposes: generating knowledge, evaluating effectiveness, deepening understanding of a setting, or illuminating the dynamics of the system, among many possibilities. And so purposes vary. The point is to be purpose-driven. But the yang of that is that the inquiry is a process that unfolds in a dynamic world. Purpose can change, as can other aspects of qualitative inquiry or developmental evaluation, when conditions and circumstances change. What begins as exploration may become confirmation. What begins as studying routine emergency room culture becomes studying emergency room response to crisis in the face of the pandemic. A study of an after-school program for low African American children becomes a study of preparing children to deal with societal racism when a staff member in the school is killed by police during a routine traffic violation. We actually experienced that example. So being purpose-driven and being flexible is, rather than being separate principles, in this framing become yin and yang. Another related example is staying focused versus staying open. Staying focused means to formulate guiding questions that will bound and direct your inquiry. It's impossible to look at everything with limited time and resources. Focus is essential. A common challenge for dissertation students is narrowing the focus of their study so they can complete the dissertation within a reasonable amount of time. No advice is more common from dissertation advisors than to focus, focus, focus. But the yang is staying open. An essential characteristic of DE inquiry is openness to where the inquiry takes you. Interviews and observations can yield unanticipated trajectories of inquiry. Follow where the data take you. This can mean changing the questions guiding the overall study, changing the sample, changing interview questions, and adapting the overall inquiry framework to what is being learned or new opportunities that occur during the inquiry. So we stay focused, then we also stay open. That's a notion that the realities of our work have us engaged in this yin-yang of practice. Another pair is be reflexive. In qualitative inquiry, the inquiry is the instrument. Who you are, what you bring to the study, your perspectives, experiences, training, worldview, and interest all affect the process. At the same time, savor relationships. Those who are partners and participants in your study are interdependent with you. Inquiry is ultimately an interaction. It's not just about you or even primarily about you. It's about the people whose lives you're entering. So being reflexive and savoring relationships constitutes complementary pairs. Savor particularity. The first obligation in data collection is to do justice to each case, to be fully present for each interview, to mindfully engage with each observation, and to be completely present throughout any observation. Whatever the unit of analysis, individual, family, team, community, organization, a couple, whatever the unit of analysis, describe it as a unique case. That thick description captures and portrays the particularities of the case. At the same time, we do pattern detection. Separating signal from noise is the analytical and interpretive challenge. Across particularities are commonalities, patterns, themes, ways of seeing the world, ways of being in the world that are not unique or particular. Qualitative findings detect, make sense of, interpret, and report patterns and themes. Related is framing findings contextually. Context always matters. Findings emerge within a context, stay grounded in context. At the same time, we look to generate transferable lessons, look for insights that cut across cases and can inform understandings in diverse contexts. Just a couple more here. Savor perception. Thomas's theorem states that what is perceived as real is real in its consequences. Merton's corollary adds that what is not perceived as real has consequences. Understand and value diverse perceptions. That's fundamental to constructivism and social construction. But there's also a real reality out there. Capture reality. Beneath perceptions are material realities. Diagnosed illness is a reality. Health disparities by gender and race are real. Homelessness exists. Perceptions about these and other phenomena are important. Reality of these phenomena is also important. Report and interpret both. savor perception, capture reality. Keep it simple. Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the best. Strive for parsimony. Things are usually connected or behave in the simplest or most economic way, especially with reference to alternative evolutionary pathways. That's the basis of the principle of parsimony or Occam's razor. The yang is to apply complex dynamic systems thinking. Examine interrelationships, engage with diverse perspectives, acknowledge boundary issues and defining systems, look for nonlinear pathways, and interactive forward and backward feedback loops. So those are some framing of approaching principles in complementary yin-yang pairs, as opposed to having a dominant set of principles that are a list, looking at the realities, the messy realities of complementary pairs in a yin-yang sense. We want to give you a chance to discuss and react those, but let me see if there are any questions or comments in general before we put you into breakout groups. Charmaine's entered a chat note that Nora Murphy has been working on this this kind of framing as well. Any initial thoughts? Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. Verify my understanding that moving from complementary pairs and overcoming the visualization of complementary pairs as poles along a continuum. The yin and the yang invites us to see the complementary pairs as both and to visualize them differently so that we see them as interconnected and interdependent, and almost emphasize the mutualistic potential rather than framing them as things that are apparently opposite, and that we strive to use in a way that's complementary, but really the idea of framing them as the yin and the yang is to really emphasize the way that they can work well together. And I think that is so important in, for example, my context where I work with centralized and decentralized nodes of evaluation. So it's not about decentralizing everything and saying that the centralized interests don't get to exist or that they're wrong, but reframing it so to avoid polarization. And I just wanted to see if that's sort of a big part of that development between the way complementary pairs sometimes are understood and talked about.
Yeah, the thing that I think yin yang adds to that, you said it very well, Andrea Lisa, is to understand not only that they're complementary and on a continuum, but that in fact to understand the meaning of one actually depends upon the other. That light depends upon darkness for us to understand what it is. Light has no meaning without darkness as a way of understanding it. And so what I think yin yang helps us do is to see that each illuminates the other, and to help us understand where we are on the journey at any given time. And the notion that we can actually walk and chew gum at the same time, that we can hold these ideas together in a way that informs our work rather than following singularities, that we're dealing with the complexities of interrelationships. Sarah, and then Seema.
Yeah, I really like these, and I was trying to apply them to some of the work that I'm working on now, and some of the different ways of thinking that I'm encountering moving from consulting back into an organization. And I was thinking, and your examples too, it's like you have those two principles, but just like the actual yin yang symbol, you're sort of operating with one dominant. I would think like you'd almost never be, like the two are equally present in a moment. You have one that's sort of the dominant slight default, and then the other one is always present there, that little dot, and then maybe something comes up and you need to flow more into the other one. So I was thinking of that example you gave of the shooting at the school. So you're sort of like going along one path, and then you were open to, okay, now we need to sort of repivot. So that's how I'm understanding them, but I was just kind of thinking that through, and I was like, okay, I'm not sure I've completely digested it. But.
What at any given moment, I mean, a lot of the application of principles is so situational and contextual, and we find that with Proverbs. So there's a yin yang to the Proverbs. The early bird gets the worm. The second mouse gets the cheese. That's yin and yang. The early bird gets the worm. So be ready, be there early. But the second mouse gets the cheese is that sometimes when you're the first one there, you're at the highest risk point, and you can learn from what has happened to others. So you want to know whether you're in a context where being the early bird for scarce resources is more important than being careful about how you're entering into a new unknown situation. And so it likewise, from a management point of view, I was recently this week working with somebody, an organization that's really struggling to stay strategic. And as the director and senior staff were talking about what they were dealing with, the yang of staying strategic is the devil's in the details. You've got to attend to details. Being strategic only takes you so far. If you don't execute the details, being strategic isn't very helpful. So it's going, but you don't want to get so caught in the details that they're not connected to the strategy. And those are the lies that we seem to live in. Let's take Seema's comment and Anna's comment, and then we'll give you 10 minutes to interact in groups and with Christoph as well. Seema?
Sure, thank you. So my question is much related to the resources that are available to an evaluator, especially say an internal evaluator, where the evaluation was commissioned to answer a certain set of questions. And even though as an evaluator, I appreciate the value of this yin-yang principle, sometimes those who commission the evaluation, they aren't open to address the emerging questions. We start out with a set of questions, then as we learn more about the program, there are other questions that seem more relevant and the need to attend to. But as an evaluator, we have little power to attend to those questions, and we still have to stick with what we started because that was what we were contracted for example. How do we handle these situations?
That's a great question. And I run into this a lot, and part of it is we need to be changing the terms of reference and how evaluations are commissioned to include the expectation, especially if we're doing developmental principles-focused evaluation, that the evaluation has the capacity to be emergent and adaptable in changed conditions. Ironically, Seema, I hear the exact opposite complaints from internal evaluators as well. So you've described a situation where you've got a purpose and new opportunities emerge and it's hard to make the shift. The other thing I hear from a lot of internal evaluators is they've got a major responsibility of something they're trying to do, but the director of the organization keeps giving them off assignments, add-on things to do that keep them from getting their main assignment done because they get treated as somebody who can answer any question that comes up. So they're constantly distracted by little pieces of work that keep them away from their big main purpose. So it can run either way.
So I'd just like to add, yes, the distraction is also another component. And I experienced that too, but thanks for bringing it up.
So Anna and then Christoph.
So I was just thinking as I was listening to everyone that I wondered if one of the ways this could be helpful in both design and it actually reminds me, to me, the most valuable function most evaluators can serve, especially I'm inside the organization that I work with, is tied to process use, because if you drag people along with you, they will learn things that will end up answering a lot of their questions with or without surveying 100 people. But what I would do if I was trying to use this concept is I would want to spend time determining what these yin yang poles are that are important in whatever your context is. And then it's almost, to me, one of the ways you could do is ask people to invest in which one they want to focus on while knowing that the other one is there. So it's like, okay, you have good on one side and evil on the other side and all these things in between. So the strategy part, and this is also, I'm thinking in my futures work, is where do you want to go with that? Knowing that when you move forward on one side, you have to mitigate or be aware of the other side. So I just wondered if the idea of talking or using this concept in that way made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the purpose is the reflective practice of knowing where you are at any given point. In facilitation, for example, we have to attend to both the group process, like people feel engaged and involved, but we also have to be sure that tasks are getting done. And so there's usually, it's treated as a tension between task work and process work in groups, but in fact, both have to happen. And what we know is when you get too far out in one direction or the other, that the overall work becomes interfered with. And so much of the work and life is managing a balance in the middle so that you don't get so far out that you're not being functional because you're not fully engaged with the full continuum of responsibilities and possibilities that you have. Christoph.
Yes, I try to be very short. I'm trying to explain to some Europeans, also in European research programs, about the principles of the Blue Marble Planet evaluation in general. And I get the feedbacks that the most difficult point to understand is really the yin and yang. They think it's esoteric or not really serious. All the other factors are considered to be quite clear. I mean, that people should get out of their silo thinking, and all of these topics are clear. The yin and yang topic is quite difficult to explain. It's just the feedback and the remark that I see when I'm discussing about concepts, evaluation concepts. The second point, what I find extremely interesting is your notions about the reality, because and the reality there, I don't think it's yin and yang. The difference between, I think it was Thomas Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolutions. He was writing a book about the structure of scientific revolutions, and he was making the distinction between truth and reality. So when you have to deal with politicians, for example, which is in my case often the case, people who are talking about the truth, this has to do with religion. This is something that has to do with the beliefs, and with beliefs can be different. Everyone can believe what she or he wants to believe, but reality is something different. Reality is the notion, where you describe what is really happening. And you will see this in the next year, in the presidential election, about the truth and the reality. You can divide what Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden will tell you about truth and about the truth and about the beliefs and about the reality. So I think this distinction is very interesting, and maybe yin and yang could be kind of a distinction between truth and reality, because I see there is a real difficult gap, to overcome. But I might be wrong.
Thank you. Nikki, glad you were able to join us. Introduce yourself. We did introductions early on, and make your comment.
I don't know how well this is going to come through because I'm at home, but my name is Nikki Bowman. I'm from Wisconsin in the United States, right by the Great Lakes. Fascinating conversation. I'm really enjoying it. I think the concept of balance that Michael brought up, as we're sort of working on the nexus of global the climate and health, things being imbalanced or imbalanced really helps sort of bridge this yin yang. I like all the complexities in between. I'll just say that I'm not into, you know, singular worldviews or duality, frankly, because it's, you know, good and evil, you know, however we put it, but that's sort of the context that we function in a lot. That's what gets reinforced. Christoph, I appreciate your plausible points here. I would also like to add to that, that truth also is about holding power. And so in the name of whichever administration is running us, the things that are going on in the world today, as an Indigenous person, it's very hard to hear the moral high horse of which the United States stands on regarding the current strife out on the Gaza Strip. And I'm not going to get into the politics of that. All I'm saying is the truth is the truth that is told by the folks that are in power, and to keep those of the rest of us down. And so as someone who has not had you know, practically, theoretically, legally, or whatever, our truth told and upheld, that's, you know, it's a really tough pill to swallow. I know you're right on some of those points, but truth is not universal. And I also think that there are some people, including good folks on here, who, if Indigenous people wouldn't continue to speak up, we wouldn't know the different origin stories and the different perspectives, because democracy, even though it's highly lauded, also came at a cost to Indigenous folk. And so I think it's super complex, and I hope we get to continue having this discussion. It's coming up a lot with artificial intelligence and what principles to involve in the current European Evaluation Society conference going on. And it's, you know, these are real, you know, where do the principles fit in? How do we put governance and policy in place to be evaluators that are doing good medicine and being good relatives instead of causing harm? And so, you know, I just wanted to offer that, and thank you for this very rich discussion, this rich, safe discussion that we get to have, even if all of our points aren't, you know, all kumbaya, which I don't expect because we're scholars, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Always good to hear from you. Anybody else have a comment? Kind of lost our time for breakout here. Are there other examples that come to mind for you of yin yangs that you experience in your own practice? This that was aimed at dynamic methods and the challenges we face in being adaptable methodologically, but it happens on the programming side as well. So Mark, you're always thoughtful about these things. Let me put you on the spot. How do you experience the yin yang side of developmental methods and evaluation?
I really like them. No, one of the, I'm thinking of metaphors about how to deal with them, and you know, sometimes you're navigating them, and sometimes we're using them for creative thinking. And so there's a lot of work on polarity management for those that are interested in that, and that has some really helpful insights about how to deal with tensions. And Michael, you remember Brenda and Francis, who did a lot of work on this, paradoxes and dilemmas. Sometimes this idea of integrated thinking is also appropriate. And Roger Martin from the University of Toronto does a lot of stuff on integrated thinking, but I really like it because we come up upon these tensions that someone had raised this earlier, that I think people might think are kumbaya, but they're real, like the process product tension in community change. On the one hand, we know that we have to engage people, diverse people, in meaningful, thoughtful, empowering ways if we're ever to get to the right solution, and if we're meant to live out this principle of nothing about us without us. On the other hand, we know that people will get frustrated with lots of meetings and excessive talk, and if we don't move to action, product, and results. And those are both true. Anyone who's facilitated anything knows that. And so the challenge is, sometimes you go back and forth, but the challenge for most facilitators is, how do we maintain maximum authentic engagement while moving efficiently to action and outcomes?
Very well put.
Yeah, so So I think maybe that with the tension, what are the two, this is what I'm leaving this question with, what are the 2 or 3 ways of thinking about surfacing, making framing and making coherent and using productively tensions? There's polarity management, there's trying to ride the line between them, there's integrated thinking. I think there's lots of ways of dealing with them.
Your mention of thinking about a metaphor actually took me to the buffalo thorn tree in southern Africa, which is apparently the only tree in the world that has both straight thorns and catclaw thorns on the same tree. And it symbolizes in the culture that the straight thorns push you forward, the catclaw thorns hold you back, and that whether you're being pushed forward or held back, either way, the transition is going to be painful. But it captures in that single vision. I don't know how well you can see this, but the notion of having both kinds of thorns together in one growth is a sort of natural yin yang representation. Somebody else's hand was up.
Yes, Michael, that was my
Go ahead,
hand.
Nick. Yes.
Yes, I just want to say, you know, I'm finding this very, very interesting. I'm actually calling in from South Africa, and where we are right now, it is a very, very diverse country, which is still trying to find its feet. So we've got different people with different perspectives in any form of reform that you might want, be it an educational policy, where people would think if this policy is introduced, then it is going to be much to my detriment, or more specifically, the white folk and the black folk still trying to find our feet in terms of sharing resources and all those things. So when you look at the yin-yang principle actually and go deep into it, you'll find that there is actually a win-win situation for everybody. If we then go into the details and somewhat include, I mean, a blue marble way of looking at our interventions in any of the programs that we might be engaged in, be it at a community level, be it in schools, I mean, in education, applying the yin-yang principle so that everyone feels safe, that it's actually a common agenda and everyone actually ends up winning in the end. So yeah, that's just my part there.
Oh, very nicely put. And it brings to mind, and a couple of people had mentioned it earlier, we're talking these days about decolonizing evaluation as one kind of yin. And I think it's helpful to have the yang of that, which in the African case is made in Africa evaluation, is inclusion, is pluralism. And so we go from the decolonizing to a form of evaluation that will inevitably have traces of that colonial heritage in it. And one of the things that I found in moving through, been doing some theory work around how the various evaluation theories have evolved. And what often isn't dealt with in the theory books is, because each theory gets presented on itself, is the way in which virtually all theories are a reaction to another theory. It is a version of the Thomas Kuhn scientific revolution. So goal-free evaluation was a reaction to goal-based evaluation. And in the yin-yang terms, the goal-based evaluation says, yes, you ought to look at whether a program's achieving what it ought to be achieving. You ought to also look at what else is going on and what's actually happening to participants. And in the same way, theory-driven evaluation is a reaction to logic models, which were sequential and logical, but didn't have the mechanism of change embedded in them. Developmental evaluation came out of utilization-focused evaluation. Principles-focused evaluation came out of developmental evaluation. And Blue Marble evaluation came out of principles-focused evaluation. And so the heritages, the lineage of the things that we move away from continue with us in a different form, and understanding those trajectories is a part, I think, of understanding the challenges and dilemmas that we face. Anna?
It's funny just listening to you say that, Dr. Patton. One of the things that I struggle with a lot with people is methodological and theory tools. In our world, it's toolkits, and it really makes sense because one of the things is, I think part of this principle, yin yang, part of all this is just a validation to the fact that you can't have a selfish discipline. That all these things are always on the table based on the context and figuring out these yin yang, that which is important, which is in your world, so to speak. But then you cannot be, if you are going to turn around and say, this is how we do, and developmental evaluation isn't pretty hard to make a selfish discipline, even if you try, but this is the way we're going to do we do a program evaluation, we follow these steps, we use these tools, utilization focused evaluation, we have to hit these check marks, do this. That's contradictory to looking at these principles and these yin yang, and it also gets to why a lot of this stuff ends up not helpful or changing, or there's reaction push, we're going to get a new way to evaluate. Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to assess the context, assess the people involved, find some of the critical yin yang principles, and then fit the design and the project into that world. So that's how that's what it does for me, is give me validation in my explanation for why you should use the tool that does what you need, not just because it's the tool.
Right. And there are generative tensions in making those choices as we go along, and understanding some of those tensions as complementary pairs rather than opposites is part of what this is playing around. And as we continue to work on it, we will bring back our latest thinking and share these ideas with you. Appreciate your input into things today, your thoughtfulness about this, and we'll get together again in a month. Any final comments from anybody?
Hi, this is Nikki again.
Yeah, Nikki.
I just would like to ask us to think about the word and, yin and yang. To me, it kind of, what came up in me was, it's the dash. 1971 is my year. The dash is everything that happens in between, and I don't know, creator willing, how long I'll be here, but I think that I don't want us to brush by the and, because the and is the important. It's that relationship that, Michael, I think you're talking about, and it's a little word, but it's important. It's all the stuff in between.
Nicely put. Good place for us to end. So thank you all. We'll hope to see many of you back here in a month. Have a good American Thanksgiving for those of you who celebrate that, and the rest of you, Thanksgiving in general. Charmaine, any final comment?
No, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.